On September the 1st, 2020, at approximately 14:11 hours, I was working routine patrol and self-dispatched myself to a call that communications relayed via radio in reference to a caller reporting that they had discovered two subjects who were apparently deceased upon the front porch of a residence on E Avenue. Communications relayed that the caller had reported seeing these two subjects bleeding and with blood on the walls of the porch. While en route, I heard communications relay the initial notes of the call, and once I heard Lieutenant G arriving on scene via radio, I initiated emergency traffic until I arrived on the scene shortly after. Upon my arrival on the scene, I observed Lieutenant G approaching the front porch to the residence. I made my presence known to him, who informed me that he believed the situation to be a murder-suicide. I assisted the lieutenant in examining the initial scene, and upon doing so, I approached the front porch to the residence, where I first observed two subjects who were obviously deceased from what appeared to be gunshot wounds to both of their heads. My initial scene observation was as follows. Three outdoor chairs were placed upon the front porch. From the left side of the porch, if looking at the front porch while facing the front of the residence from the street side, moving right, the first chair was empty. The second chair contained a female subject, and the third chair contained a male subject. The female subject was in a normal seating position with her feet flat upon the concrete flooring of the porch. The female was facing the front yard, north, and her upper body, from her belt line upward, was slumped to the right. I observed what I appeared to be a single gunshot wound to her left upper temple and a large collection of blood which had formed on the porch near her body as a result of the gunshot wound. A single shell casing, silver in color, and a projectile, which had been damaged as a result of impact, were located near the female's right foot. The projectile had what appeared to be strands of the female's hair adjoined to it where it lay. Also, near the female's feet was a backpack. The male subject was in a normal seated position, with his feet slightly upturned at an angle upon the concrete flooring of the porch. The male subject was facing the front yard north, and his upper body was also slumped to the right. This slump position was more exaggerated than the female's body position, which appeared to have been the result of him sitting farther forward upon his chair at the time of his death. I was unable to determine where exactly the male subject had been shot, but there was a large amount of blood that had poured from the subject's nose and mouth, and a small perforation within the vinyl siding on the wall behind where the male subject had been sitting. A further inspection of this hole within the vinyl siding revealed what appeared to be blood surrounding the same. A silver shell casing was located near the male subject's feet within a pooled collection of blood. Near this casing, I located a black handgun, which was later determined to be a T brand firearm with a black metal frame, medium brown toned wood grain handle. The firearm was pointing east and the hammer was still cocked. In front of the male subject's feet was a takeout box from a restaurant which had a receipt taped to the top of the same. The receipt had an order number and a date. I did not open the box. A drinking cup from this restaurant was located near the female's feet, which still appeared to contain a majority of its original liquid content. There was a large amount of blood upon the porch, which had collected primarily directly beneath the subjects and had begun pouring down the porch and onto the ground immediately beneath same. The blood had already begun coagulating and serum separation had begun occurring. The presence of this volume of blood and its physical condition seemed to indicate that the subjects had likely been on the porch deceased for several hours. The weather conditions for the day had been humid and overcast, with a temperature range between 68 degrees and 81 degrees Fahrenheit, and the day did not become overly warm until the mid-afternoon. The presence of flies covering almost every exposed area of the subjects' bodies also seemed to indicate a much longer time frame than when the 911 call was received near 14:11 hours. Detectives D, S, and AB arrived on the scene near this time, and I discussed case information with them. Other officers began arriving on the scene, including several lieutenants, and we began discussing how to handle different portions of the incident. Lieutenant M arrived near this time also. Officer D, who had taken a rear perimeter position at the back of the residence, reported that she had located a backpack within the wood line near the back of the house. I never observed or interacted with this backpack while on scene. A vehicle was located on scene, parked in front of the residence curbside. The vehicle was bearing a Pennsylvania license plate, which returned to a 2005 Chevy, registered to a Mrs. G. Mrs. G was later discovered to be the mother of the victim. Detective S informed me that he had found previous involvements at the residence, which he believed concerned the subjects on the porch. He informed me that he had spoken to Detective Y, who had investigated an incident involving a Mr. C and a Mrs. B, whereby the suspect had been arrested for some type of stalking charge against Mrs. B. It was believed at that time that these were the two identities of the subjects present upon the porch. There were no other vehicles located on the property or curbside area surrounding the residence. Several other officers had already arrived on scene, along with several county EMS and fire department units. A crime scene log with a crime scene tape perimeter was established, which extended from the residence east to H Street, west towards D Street, and north to W Street. Supervisors began speaking with detectives regarding what steps should be taken next. Detective B left to prepare a search warrant at the police department. Detective S remained on scene. Lieutenant G and Lieutenant C began speaking with fire department units regarding gaining forced entry into the residence via a side door. Other officers who had arrived on scene were requested by detectives to canvass the surrounding areas for any information related to hearing gunshots. Officers reported that several different neighbors had heard gunshots at times between 9:15 and 9:18 hours that morning, and that some neighbors reported hearing a series of 2 gunshots and some 3. See those officers' supplemental reports for additional information. Eventually, the decision was made to breach the residence and perform a safety sweep inside. At 14:43 hours, officers breached the residence and cleared same of any persons that may be inside prior to exiting same. I assisted in the sweep inside the residence and found nothing to report. I informed Detective S that we needed to make some attempt to contact the female subject's mother before she returned home from work. He made contact with Detective Y to arrange this. I also found the local file for the male subject's father and provided this information to Detective S. I attempted to locate social media profiles for the 2 subjects and was able to locate a Facebook profile for each. On the Facebook profile for Mr. C, a relationship status was found which indicated that he was in a dating relationship with the victim. Both Mr. C and Mrs. W profile pages were very scarce and didn't include any newer pictures or posts than from February of 2020. These Facebook accounts were later determined to be fraudulent, and it was later determined that the 2 individuals on the porch were never in a dating relationship. At some point, a news media crew arrived on scene and set up their equipment within a yard near D Street and E Avenue. Lieutenant T, who had been on scene already, was informed of this and he addressed the crew. I realized that there were several neighbors out of their houses looking onto the scene and that the 2 deceased subjects on the porch were highly visible to same. I informed Lieutenant G that I would make contact with the EMS units on scene to request draping materials and tape to cover the banister and railing of the porch and make the scene less visible. I did so and received several dark drapes with tape from EMS units, and Lieutenant G and I began taping up the scene accordingly. At no time did either of us interfere with any physical evidence present on scene while doing so. At 15:17 hours, the medical examiner, Mr. S., arrived on scene and began working same. I provided information that we'd obtained to Mr. S. when requested. Shortly afterward, at 15:26 hours, lab technicians arrived on the scene and began to process the same. They informed me that they would not begin processing the scene until Detective B returned to the residence with a signed search warrant. At 15:42 hours, Detective B arrived back to the scene and informed us that he had a search warrant for the residence in hand. The crime lab began processing the scene near 1600 hours. Shortly after lab began processing, I was informed by Lieutenant T that I could prepare to clear the scene due to the end of my shift approaching. Other supervisors made arrangements for first shift units to be relieved, and this was completed. I cleared the scene near 16:30 hours and concluded my involvement in this incident. The physical evidence on the scene seemed to indicate clearly that the suspect and the victim had been sitting on the front porch together, and that the suspect, whose chair was placed slightly behind the victim's chair, produced the black Taurus handgun and shot the victim in the temple, resulting directly in her death. The physical evidence on the scene also seemed to clearly indicate that the suspect, after murdering the victim, used the same handgun to fatally wound himself and commit suicide. The handgun located on scene was almost directly beneath the suspect's right hand upon the concrete flooring of the porch. I conferred with Detective B on scene regarding how this report would need to be completed, and he informed me that I would need to complete a report for the criminal homicide of the victim, presumably by the suspect, and another report for the suspect's suicide after he murdered the victim. A separate report for the suspect's suicide will be completed under a separate case report number, but these will be linked and almost narratively identical. At no time did I physically disturb any evidence on the scene. I did not obtain specific information regarding the handgun located due to my clearing of the scene prior to the same being manipulated. Below are included typed versions of my handwritten notes for preservation. The complete call notes are also located at the conclusion of this report.